Welcome to Martini Time. I hope you're having a good day. I had a pretty interesting day considering I live a mundane, boring life. So I went to have breakfast with a friend and we met. He lives in Petersburg, so we met halfway at a restaurant. And I won't mention the name of the restaurant, but we had breakfast there. And it was the most bland meal I've ever had in my life. And I ordered a cheese omelet and some hash browns. So I got it was basically some scrambled eggs folded over some cheap cheese with no flavor to it, and the potatoes were not hash brown, but just kind of like mushed up, fried potatoes mushed up with no flavor. And there it was sitting there, and I could even salt and pepper wouldn't even help it. And my friend poured Worcestershire sauce all over his. But I got to laughing because I study. My practice is to study the Dharma, the Buddha Dharma, and apply it to everyday life. That's what you do when you haven't got an exciting life. So anyway, one of the Buddha Dharma means teaching, life teaching, and but in order for it to the rubber to hit the road in your practice, you have to apply and discover the teaching in your everyday life. It's not something you learn, it's something you discover. So one of the teachings of Buddha Dharma is that all experience is based in three feeling tones. All experience has pleasant feeling tone, unpleasant feeling tone, or neutral feeling tone, or what you might call boring, just neutral, right? And for the ego to form, it needs one of these three feeling tones. And the difficulty with boredom is that it doesn't give you any traction. So we don't like neutral. We'll turn neutral into, pleasant and unpleasant feeling gives us something to get hold of. It gives us something to go for or something to resist. So that the sense of self rises with pleasure and unpleasant feelings. But it doesn't rise with neutral. There's nothing there. It's a neutral feeling. So there's no excitement. So we're always discovering the neutral feeling tone when we walk into a room and everybody's just sitting there and say, well, what are we doing? Aren't we doing something? Or you go to a doctor's office and there are no magazines. What do you do? And I talked about this the other day when I went to the emergency room to get some medication for my phlegm, which, by the way, went away. They put me in this holding cell, sitting there on the edge of the examination bed, looking at a blank wall for an hour. So I meditated upon neutral. So we all have this experience when we are thrown into this neutral zone, and we try to make something out of it. Usually we'll make it into something unpleasant. My God, where are they? Aren't they coming yet? They don't have any books here. Don't they have a TV? Or I can't stand it, so it's unpleasant. So what's neutral becomes unpleasant, so the self can create itself and be somebody. So then you go and tell everybody about the unpleasant experience you had when there was nothing there. So in other words, we can't stand this neutral zone. It has to become pleasant or unpleasant. And I found that very interesting. And when I got that meal, I said, aha, there's the neutral zone. There's the neutral feeling tone. There was no seasoning. There was no exciting taste. And it wasn't unpleasant. There wasn't an unpleasant taste. It wasn't like, ugh, like that. So it wasn't unpleasant or pleasant. It was just bland. And that's kind of like the worst sin, to be bland or boring, somebody, so we're always, we don't want to be boring. We'd rather be unpleasant or pleasant, problem or a happy-go-lucky guy, somebody, but we don't want to be boring. That seems to be the worst sin of all, is to be boring, neutral. And so we really, and the problem is that most of life is neutral. Most of life is not boring, because we make neutral into boring in order to give our little sense of self some traction, something to get some traction on, so we can feel like we're doing something or somebody, you see. So this neutral zone, a neutral feeling tone, if you notice that in the practice of being mindful, well, that's what mindfulness is, noticing. So in the practice of being mindful, which is a spiritual practice, you begin to notice more and more subtle movements of the mind, because your intention is to be mindful of the mind. So what the intention of the practice is to become curious and interested in the operating system of your own mind, not somebody else's mind, but your mind. That's the whole point of meditation and being mindful, is to be mindful or noticing or being an observer of how the mind works. And it's very, very scientific, in the sense that a scientist is very curious about the movement of the external world. He might be interested in snails, so he would study the movement of snails, you see. And the more he learned, the more subtlety of the snail he would notice, and he would take notes and all that, you see. So Buddhism, the practice of Buddhism, is basically being curious about your own snail mind. Instead of being curious about some animal out there, you're curious about your own mind as a system, as an operating system. In the same way we might be curious about how the operating system of our computer works, you see. So we're curious about it. And we begin to notice that that the contact with reality is based on these three feeling tones. But the feeling tones are not in reality. In other words, the unpleasant or the pleasant or the neutral feeling is not in the meal. It's what I bring to the meal. So we don't even notice this. We don't notice that we're bringing the unpleasant feeling to something. We think that the unpleasant feeling is in the world, is in the eggs, is in the breakfast, you see. And then once we make that assumption that the unpleasant feeling or the pleasant feeling is in some form, that gives the self traction, and we build immediately a whole perception of reality based on those feeling tones. And the perception of reality is going to be a conditioned reality on what our conditioned mind, our habit mind, that we bring to experience. So experience is going to be basically a place where the contact with reality, and out of that contact we create a world and then live in it with a self that is either happy or to have gotten the pleasure, or unhappy with the unpleasant feeling, or bored, you see, with the neutral. So this whole practice is to become more sensitive to the movements of the mind and its interaction with reality, and how the formation of self is the formation of resistance or attraction or aversion, and a sense of self that is separate from reality. And this is what Buddha calls the suffering of life, is this sense of separation from our own experience. You see, so when the bland eggs come, they are perfect in what they are. In other words, they are perfectly the eggs and the potatoes. It's the, but everything else is added. If I say it's bland and not interesting, that blandness is not in the eggs and the potatoes. It's what I bring to it. If the eggs and potatoes or the meal is interesting, in other words, it's exciting to the tastes. You see, it's interesting to the taste. It's different. It's stimulating. You see. Well, then we could say it's pleasure, and the pleasure we think is in the eggs. You see, or is in the meal. Or if it's unpleasant, if it's got a really bad taste. You see. So we go through life really being played like these are three notes. Do bom bom. You see, bom bom bom. What was that? What were the three notes in the movies? I don't know. But anyway, three notes: pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. And so our whole life is a musical dance triggered by these three feeling tones, and it's repetitive because the conditioning that we bring to life. So this is unpleasant, this is pleasant. For another person, it might be just the opposite, you see. So this is a clue right there, that pleasure and the unpleasant and the pleasant is not in life. It's in what we bring to it, and what we bring to it is different from other people bring to it. So we see this all the time. You think this is great, and another person thinks it's terrible. You think your boss is intimidating you, and another person thinks the boss is great. You know, so these what we dance to these three tones unconsciously, and the experience that we create out of the three tones, you see, are then what we call. In other words, then we build these experiences. Then begin to build our story and our attitude toward life. So then the three tones, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, are basically the three basic notes of the world in which we live in. And this world is recreated, reformulated on these three notes. Whether somebody comes to the door and I have a pleasant expectation, or a unpleasant expectation, or whatever we do, there's going to be some basic feeling where the contact with reality is made, and out of that contact grows our perception of what that reality is. So I just found this to be interesting, and because what I enjoy doing is finding examples or metaphors in my everyday life that personifies or enlivens the teaching and the principles of my own mind and how my mind works. So that for this, while the meal did not taste exciting, I got some wisdom out of it. So I'll always remember that breakfast as the most boring breakfast I've ever had, and the most exciting, you see, because for me to share this with you, it's like sharing a meal, you see. So I'm sharing it with you, not sharing, oh my God, don't eat at that restaurant, they got crap, that got really bland food, yada, 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 that's, don't eat there. I say, no, that's a great palace of wisdom. Go there and discover the wisdom in bland, mundane, boring food. Thank you.